Before you have left Spain, you have caught your very first disease. When he died 3 years later, there were 700 pigs. We are going to kind of jump right into our presentation. It's called Encounters of a Different Kind, The Great Exchange and Its Impact. All right, so as we continue with our theme of exploration, you're looking here at a map of the world. Now, we all know that there are 7 continents that were in existence, although the people of that world may not be aware of what was happening on the other side of it. There were people living on 6 of the 7 continents. As I mentioned, very little contact with those 2 particular worlds. But I want to kind of jump in, and here at the museum, a lot of our staff, we love maps. And so as we dig into our collection, when we find one, we get really excited. So let's see, there we go. So we've got a map here from our collection, and it's simply a map of what was the known world at that time. The known world would have been Europe, parts of Africa, depending on the years that you're looking at, and then parts of Asia as well. Excuse me. Now, this map is dating from about 1480 or so. And it shows part of Vasco da Gama as he is making his trek around Africa. So you can see that for Africa, you can see that, let's see if hold that down, let's see. All right, Tim, this does not like me very much, but it is okay. You can see the northern part of Africa there. I've got the Horn of Africa, but it does not show the southern half. And with this map here, you know that people are going to be interacting both on land and on sea. Trade is going to thrive, and Europeans are looking for some of those Asian spices. They're looking for black pepper. They're looking for cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, but they're also looking for God and glory as they're moving about, and we'll get back into that a little bit. But also with that trade, you're going to have merchants and very powerful nations that start to control that trade and become extremely powerful and extremely wealthy. Now, in the first half of our exploration in the fall, we ended it with looking at a little bit more about some of those trade routes. So this map here may be familiar to some of you who saw that presentation, where it is showing parts of the Silk routes, both the land routes as well as the maritime routes in the south. The red dots that you see are some of the different ports that started to really play a key role in some of this trade. And this trade is going to go back and forth for hundreds of years, but when you get to the middle 14th, mid 1400s, things start to change. You have Spain, you have Portugal that are trying to find these southern routes to Asia, and there's huge competitions. Now, this is another image that is in our collection there, and you can see that the date is October 12th, 1492. And growing up in elementary school, there was that old famous song, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. This is showing him out in the middle of the Atlantic with his 3 particular ships. Christopher Columbus, Italian by trade, is sailing for the Spanish. He did not decide to go a southern route around Africa. He decided he was going to head west across the Atlantic Ocean in hopes that he would run into India. But does he arrive in India? He does not. However, as he is there and he believes as such, he calls the area in which he lands the West Indies. But when you think about that date of October 12th, 1492, it is a pretty monumentous date. And it's not so much because Columbus discovered anything. It is really about two different worlds that really had not connected as much, really kind of colliding and hitting each other front and center. So you've really got two different worlds coming into play. And Columbus actually writes down in his journal, "I saw neither sheep nor goat nor any other beast, but I have been here but a short time, half a day. Yet if there were any, I couldn't have failed to see them. There were dogs that never barked. All the trees were different from ours as day from night. And so the fruits, the herbage, and the rocks and all things." Now, he has studied many people that have come before him. He had studied the works of Marco Polo and others, but still believed that he was somewhere very close to Asia. Even though he is saying that there's some differences, he still believed where he was, where he thought he was. Now, this is an image from our collection of Amerigo Vespucci. He was an Italian explorer who actually joined a couple of Columbus's journeys, but he does one of his own on May 18th, 1499. He's leaving Cadiz, Spain, and he sails down the western coast of Africa and then straight across the Atlantic Ocean. Took him about 24 days to make it across the ocean. Now, he's going to land in what was South America, and actually Guyana was the country that he is arriving in. But then his expedition splits into two. One is going to continue further south. One is going to continue kind of going a little bit west. Now, Vespucci is the one that decides to go further south. And as he is heading down, he's along the coast of Brazil. And then eventually he starts noticing a few things. He notices that he's no longer able to see the North Star. He starts seeing constellations that most Europeans had never seen before. He also took the opportunity to study a little bit more about the flora and the fauna, noticing that there was differences from what he had heard and read in parts of India and China. He even noticed that the people in this area were a little bit different too. So in 1502, after observing the indigenous populations and the constellations, he theorized that he must be in a new world. And I've actually put the Latin mundus novus at the top there. It is not until a little bit later that cartographers finally put a name on this new land. And guess who they named it after? They named it after Amerigo Vespucci. Now, some of the animals that he is going to see, does anyone see what is at the bottom of his feet? Oh, bigger, it is a type of lizard, but bigger than a gecko. It's one that people will keep as a pet. It's an iguana. Okay? He also noticed that some of the indigenous populations were actually eating this strange and unusual animal to him. But he actually, he was not very fond of doing such a thing. Now, the name gets put on this time period as the Great Columbian Exchange, and that was done by a gentleman by the name of Alfred Crosby. And I actually have his book here. And this book actually came out in the early 70s, and it's simply called The Columbian Exchange, Biological and Cultural Consequences of 1492. It's one of the books that a lot of historians, archaeologists, anthropologists actually point to because he did a very detailed study of what was happening during this time. He's the one that actually gives this terminology. Sometimes you hear it as the Great Columbian Exchange or sometimes just the exchange. And the easiest way to explain it, it is a transfer of different plants, animals, and people from both sides of the hemispheres. And we're going to get into quite a bit of that. It is also Crosby who gives us these terms of Old World and New World. Old World simply meant anything that was native to Europe, Africa, and Asia. The New World is anything that is native to North and South America, and of course, later on, places like Australia would also be included. But when we're thinking about the early 1400s and 1500s, mostly what they're referring to is North and South America when it comes to New World. So I'm gonna be using these terms as we go about. And I've got pictures in there to remind you of what we're talking about. So again, Old World, Europe, Africa, and Asia. New World, North America, South America. Okay? Now, with this exchange, one of the most catastrophic changes is going to be that of disease. And we have a story that we used to use here when we were teaching a specific class on the Great Exchange to elementary school students. Because this, getting into disease and things could be very heavy. So I don't want to say we didn't try to make light out of it, but we tried to put it in a way that they would understand. And it's kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, so I want to share that story with you. But I'm going to need you to put yourselves in the position of being an explorer on one of these vessels coming across the Atlantic. So put yourself in the 1500s. You are a young Spanish explorer who got the chance of a lifetime. You were chosen to participate in a voyage of exploration across the Atlantic. Now, you are so excited about this journey, but you have no idea what life would be like at sea. Before you have left Spain, you have caught your very first disease, smallpox. You know something is wrong because you got a very high fever. You're also very tired, started suffering headaches and backaches. After 2 or 3 days, a rash broke out on your face, your arms, and your legs. After a week, little pockets of pus marked up your body. We usually get lots of uhs from the kids at this point. It took a week for them to dry up and to get crusty. As you sailed south towards Africa, the scabs developed and then eventually fell off, leaving you marked for life. We know that smallpox, again, based on research, it is a viral disease that had originated from an old world monkey. But we're not done. As you sailed down the coast of Africa, you eventually reached the Canary Islands. You started having stomach cramps. Unfortunately, you caught another disease. Dysentery. All day long, suffering from severe stomach pains, lots of diarrhea, all mixed with blood. Dysentery is a chronic disease of the large intestine, courtesy of an amoeba. As your ship has reached the western coast of Africa, your health has went from bad to worse. A mosquito bit you and gave you, got another high fever, chills, and you started sweating. Your condition went untreated, so the attacks continued to occur. Of course, started by infested mosquitoes that transmitted when they bit you. However, your trip across the Atlantic was quite pleasant. You thought you were finished with contagious diseases until you reached the Americas and the Caribbean islands. Your ship is going to dock at one of the newly formed port towns, but there were a number of conquistadors, Spanish warriors, conquerors, and one accidentally coughed on you, sneezed on you, and gave you influenza. Just when you started feeling better, you had an abrupt fever, headaches, chills, became tired. Your muscles all over your body were so tender and sometimes ached in pain. It was hard for you to carry on with your duties. You tried to avoid interacting with anybody on land, hoping to avoid catching another bad cold. Sadly, contaminated lice joined your ship for the journey back across the Atlantic to Europe. You have become one of the sailors that has caught typhus. 10 days after being bitten, out in the middle of the ocean, another high fever. Your head begins to ache, muscles all over your body are inflamed. 5 days after that, a dark rash appeared and you started to feel delirious. However, at this point, many may die, but you pulled through that second week and you survived, barely making it back to your home. What do you think? Lucky? Yes. So the disease, now, as I said, that is a story that we have told to younger students, and usually what we make them do with that, or we had them do, is we gave them the outline of a person's body, and as we told the story, they had to put the symptoms in there. Children and their artistic abilities were pretty interesting, especially on the dysentery part with some of the students. But some of the diseases that I described, smallpox, influenza, bubonic plague, typhus, chickenpox, cholera, cowpox, measles, whooping cough, dysphoria, yellow fever, and malaria were all diseases that were brought across the Atlantic Ocean into the New World. It is estimated that pre-Columbian contact in the Americas, that indigenous populations numbered from about 40 to 100 million. At least 40 to 60 million indigenous people lived by 1492, and there were no serious infectious diseases, and most had no immunity to some of the diseases that are coming in. One of the first epidemics that it's going to cause havoc is going to be in 1519 with that of smallpox. It is the first recorded American epidemic that hit the Greater Antilles, Mexico, South America, and Peru. It said it was the most severe single loss of indigenous life. Now, we've got more than that. We're actually able to find a quote. And I've been trying to pronounce the particular month up there, so I know I'm going to butcher it for you. But I am going to read it out to you. It was the month of, and I have to sound this out, the Pele'uwi, or better known as the Festival of the Mountain or the Festival of the Hills, which represented the 13th month of the Aztec calendar. But when that month began, it spread over the people as a great destruction. Some of them were quite covered with pustules all over all parts, their faces, their head, their breast. There was great havoc, Very many died. They couldn't walk. They laid in their resting places and their beds. They could not move. They could not stir. They could not change position or lie on one side, nor face down, nor on their backs. And if they stirred, much did they cry out. Great was the smallpox destruction, covered, mantled with pustules, very many people died. And there are a few drawings that can be found showing the devastation of this smallpox epidemic. If you did survive the smallpox, the scars were devastating. Some of these ravaged whole communities to the point that those that survived were actually burning down the other buildings in hope to just to try to contain this the best way they can. It is said that they tried to check the stench by doing that. Some lost their sight, some were forever disfigured, and within days of catching this disease, a healthy person could turn into a pustulal, oozing horror whose closest relatives can barely recognize. And that was what Crosby wrote down as he is talking about this disease. Now, everybody is familiar with Hernan Cortez, who comes in. He's known as the conqueror of Mexico or the conqueror of the Aztecs. And it was said that disease actually preceded his arrival and stayed for quite a bit. This is one of our images from our collection showing Hernan Cortez along with the Aztecs. And it is said that a smallpox ravaged the mighty Aztec Empire, ultimately weakening their community. Most of the warriors died, about 30 to 50% of the overall population. Basically, he comes in, it lasted for about 60 days. Cortez and his troops are gonna come back in. They're eventually gonna take over the Aztec capital at Tenochtitlan, and thus is going to end up conquering the Aztecs. However, Crosby says in his book, had there been no disease, the Aztecs could have pursued the Spanish, fought back, and perhaps captured Cortez and maybe have sacrificed him. So wonder what would have happened. I'm sorry, yes? Cortez, well, let me go back. Let's see. Since my little button is not working, I'm gonna go way over here. Cortez is right here on the horse. He's in the armor. And the button not working is probably human error. Oh, thank you. Do I just press the button? Oh! That works just fine.
Sorry. My apologies. Jeez, I didn't mean that.
It's okay, it's Tim's fault. It's all right. This Tim. You're good.
I was supposed to come off.
Oh, there we go. Okay. That's better. Yes. Let's see. Oh, I'm going backwards. Yeah, there we go. Oh, it's this. Okay, I am going backwards. It's Tim's fault. It's all good. Now, there are going to be some differences in the indigenous groups depending on where you're going to be. So when you look at some of the indigenous groups that are non-sedentary, like the Caribs in the Caribbean, they're hunter-gatherers. They didn't have any permanent homes, very small numbers. Then when you look at some that are a little bit more on the move, like the Algonquin and the Iroquois, still not very permanent settlements, stayed small, very little differences. But when you look at those, basically the larger the indigenous empire, the more the diseases are going to affect because it's a more dense population, they're very permanent, and their numbers are in the millions. Now, there are a few diseases that were native to the New World. So things like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, various forms or various things of tuberculosis, Verruga periana, Chagas, and aurea. Were there any diseases that were native to both worlds? And we've got a question right here, so here comes the mic. Yes,
Venereal disease.
that's what we're getting ready to talk about. So, there is one disease that historians, anthropologists, scientists are still fighting over to this very day, and that is syphilis. The biggest thing is they're really trying to determine where it was native to. They can prove that syphilis went back with the European explorers and ran rampant through a number of different battles that are happening over in Europe, but they're also starting to find things like South American mummies that also had a strain of syphilis, and they're trying to figure out that point. So I don't have a whole lot to say with that, so I put it under that it was probably native to both and maybe different strands that are going to take place. Now, things start to ramp up even more in 1493, which is going to be Columbus's second voyage. And he's spreading out through more of the Caribbean, and he also continues to write. All the seeds they had sown sprouted in 3 days and were ready to eat by the 25th day. Fruit stones planted in the ground sprouted in 7 days. Vine shoots sent out leaves at the end of the same period, and by the 25th day, green grapes were ready to be picked. Quite fast. So as we go through and talk very quickly in a little bit about some of the changes in animals, what animals were native to North and South America, and which ones were native to the Old World, and there's a question at the back.
Back to the diseases that were found in the Old World, how were the people in the Old World, what kind of immunity did they have, and what degree of disease did they suffer and death from those diseases?
So I didn't study that particular section for this presentation. However, I can tell you with things like the bubonic plague, that is kind of hitting a little bit earlier than what we're talking about. Many did not have disease, any immunities to what was ravaging through that. And that was being transferred from animals to humans. For the longest time, it's been said that it was the rat that introduced the bubonic plague. However, there are other scientists say that there is a more cuddly, friendly, family-friendly animal that is the cause. The guinea pig. The guinea pig. There's still fights about what exactly, but for things like the bubonic plague, many did not. But for some of the diseases that I mentioned at the beginning, basically, if you survived them in childhood, you likely would have a better chance at it in your adulthood. And kind of the same thing with, if you think about chickenpox, I had chickenpox as a child, but if you got them as an adult, it was a much more severe case in that. But that's a really good question, and I didn't dive into that one. But let's go through some of those animals. Now, there were animals in the Old World, parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia, that had similarities to some new creatures that they are seeing in the New World. So they are used to a leopard, but you can imagine their surprise when they're looking at the jaguar, which you can see some of those things. Now, somebody mentioned cat. Just a moment ago, cats were brought over with Christopher Columbus, brought over to take care of some pest problems, which we'll get to a little bit later. But cats have been known in the Old World for centuries, even finding themselves being drawn on the walls of the pyramids. You have cattle that are being brought over, and cattle were not known to indigenous populations prior to the arrival of Europeans. Now, the Vikings, as we heard in a presentation last fall, did bring some animals, but they didn't actually stay as they're moving about. But it's mentioned that Columbus brought them here. Those cattle adapted to their surroundings, becoming useful work animals, also a food source. And as indigenous populations got more acclimated to these animals, you start seeing different varieties pop up. Some of them are much leaner, much tougher. They're well suited for long drives across the plains. I mentioned Cortez earlier. He also brought cattle along with him, but they sported very long horns, which gave them the nickname of Longhorns. Spanish missionaries who eventually made their way through parts of Texas, New Mexico, and California, that brought a couple of different varieties, and they were bred into those Texas Longhorn, Argentine Criollos, and you do have the very first bovines here. Killed for their hides, for their tallow, the tallow being used for candle making, particularly in some of that work they might be doing in the mines. Chickens are also going to come over as well. They were pretty stable aboard the ships, kept them, fed them, and then turned them loose when they got here to the New World. And they really did not have any predators. Yes? Mm-hmm. So the question was, what did it look like for the animals and the people that were on board? From what we can gather, the animals would be in the lower decks of the ship. They're not really going to be brought up to the top, except for one particular animal that I'm going to get to in a moment, because it does play a key role in some navigation in just a moment. But for the most part, most of them are kept below, but you can imagine with that number of sanitation, yes, that's a nicer way to say that, yes, with that, and that's also going to cause issues as well. Goats are also brought over mostly for food. Horses. So horses were brought here by the Spanish in 1493. They were used as beasts of burden as well as those as a war animal, and they've been doing that for centuries. But there's a body of water between the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa and parts of Spain that were nicknamed the Gulf of Mares. And then there were two particular belts that no wind would have been able to catch in the sails, so ships are kind of dead in the water. They were known as the horse latitudes because that was the areas in which horses, not sure if they were being put overboard in a storm or what, but it was said that there were so many different animals, horses particularly, that went to their deaths in these areas due to that windlessness, that they called them the horse latitudes. And the horse latitudes are located just above or below the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. But those that did survive coming into North and South America, one Spanish monk who came here says that there were wild horses in such numbers that they covered the face of the earth. And when they crossed the road, it was necessary for travelers to wait and let them pass for a whole day or more. Horses, again, did not have any natural predators, and they adapted to the land quite well. The same thing can be said of the cute, cuddly pig. Again, brought here in 1493 on Columbus's second journey They also did not have any natural predators. So these pigs were basically let go into the forested regions. They found food for themselves. They adapted to the environment, and it evolved into boar-like creatures. However, the Spanish really wanted more pigs in the area, and because they adapted so well, it was said that Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto took 13 pigs to Florida in 1539 for emergency purposes. When he died 3 years later, there were 700 pigs. He started out with 13. They left them, Europeans, as they moved from the islands, would leave pairs of them to reproduce. And if you think about as sailors are coming across, there are shipwrecks, they're hitting into the islands, they are finding these creatures, they're looking how the indigenous people are preparing these animals, how they're using all the skins, and those Europeans also transformed into a term that you've all heard of, buccaneers. That's where the name comes from. There's another question? Nope, okay. Something else that we know about the indigenous people and pigs, they did take to them very well. It is barbacoa that is going to be introduced from the indigenous populations, where they are taking young saplings, tying them together into kind of a grill like how we would think of, and then over a fire with lots of smoke, they are preserving their food. And they're doing this very slowly. They're adding also tropical fruits and juices to tenderize those meats. You can go to a lot of restaurants today and find barbacoa, but you also know it as barbecue. So barbacoa is the origins of our modern day barbecue. And for some of those indigenous populations, the barbacoa or the barbecue was their sacred fire pit that they would do all of their food. Sheep were also brought here, used mostly for their wool as well as their meat. Spanish churros were brought to Hispaniola and the Antilles. Sheep were introduced into what would become the southwestern United States by Cortez in 1519. And became a staple food. They thrived in the higher elevations in places like Peru. And then, of course, you have your rats. If you're going to have a naval ship, you're going to have any kind of ship during this time period, you're always going to have the stowaways that are coming on board, also bringing a variety of diseases, and with no natural predators, they reproduce rapidly. Another reason why they brought cats. But there were some animals here that were native to this area, starting with this animal here. For they had a narrow, short face, the brown two palms across eye to eye, the eyes sticking out at the side so that when they are running, they can see who is following them. They have long beards like goats, and when they are running, they throw their heads back with their beards dragging on the ground. What's that? Buffalo or bison. That's exactly what they're describing. And indigenous populations really enjoyed having the horse here because it made life a little bit easier chasing after the bison or buffalo for their food and also making it long, long distances. But in the New World, there were also sheep. You just know them better as the sheep of Peru, llamas, and alpaca. Both of them would have been here. They're part of the camel family, providing food, meat, and their fur. And they were domesticated around the 1550s. But those were not the only animals that Europeans are going to be introduced to. You are going to have the vacacha. Let me use Tim's thing right here. Right there, it is closely related to the chinchilla. Here, you have a peccary, which is a pig-like mammal closely resembling that of a wild boar, but has dark coarse hair, a heavier head. The tail is not always visible, does have protruding canine teeth. It's also known as a javelin or a javelina. You also have the iguana, as I pointed out, with the Amerigo vespucci, the Muscovy duck. You have electric eels, cochineal beetles, which they are not eating. They're using them for medicines as well as dyes. The turkey. And would you be intimidated or scared as a 14th, 15th century explorer coming upon a very large snake that could be the size of this room? Somebody said no? Now, there were animals that were native to both worlds, both North and South America and Africa, Asia, which are bats. Old world bats that Europeans are used to are fruit bats, the flying fox bat, horseshoe bats, and the old world leaf nose bat. Native to the New World, leaf nose bats, the common vampire bat, spectral bat, which is the largest of the New World bats, and the big brown bat. And just in case anybody asks, I did look up when the book Dracula was written. That was 1897. So you also have bees that were here, as well as in the Old World. Old World, honeybees and killer bees. In the New World, you have the melipona, which is a stingless bee that the ancient Mayans used for getting sweet honey. This also included bumblebees, carpenter bees, and mason bees. And another animal that was found in both worlds was the dog. Now, this is a picture of one of our coworkers' dog. This is Nora. But both dogs were found here, different types. Now, Spanish explorers brought very fierce dogs that they eventually used in war, but also bred them to crave human flesh. And they were used against the indigenous populations. Two of the biggest ones that they used were mastiffs as well as greyhounds. But the indigenous populations were used to these guys. You've got the Chihuahua, you've got the hairless Indian dog, the Alaskan Malamute, and I'm not even gonna try to attempt to do this first one. It's nicknamed as Xolo, even though it's spelled with an X. So Xolo, basically your Mexican hairless dog is what you're looking at right there. Very statuesque. They were also used in some of the temple ceremonies amongst some of the larger populations. All right, old world plants that were brought, bananas. Bananas were native to parts of Asia, particularly around India and China. They were first brought to the Canary Islands before they had spread through the rest of the Caribbean. Citrus fruit are also native to parts of Asia. And what's interesting is I found that all citrus plants come from 5 original varieties: the pomelo, the mandarin, the citron, the kumquat, and something called a micruth, which is a type of sour lime. And then sweet oranges were known in the Mediterranean since the 1400s, but all citrus fruit came from one of those 5. And we've done presentations on coffee, which are native to Ethiopia and Africa, and have been known since the 3rd century. Coming in, the Portuguese are going to spread that along with a few other groups. And then lettuce. Lettuce was actually drawn on the walls of the Egyptian pyramids. had been used for medicinal purposes for thousands of years. It was also used as an aphrodisiac. Olives are very well known in the Old World as they're spreading from parts of Asia, making their way across the Mediterranean, used as oil, actually eating the fruit. This is an image of one of our amphora, which we do have one in display in our Mediterranean gallery. There's also a number of different herbs that are native to the Old World, so parsley, thyme, dill, rosemary, oregano, sage, coriander, or cilantro. So cilantro is your leaves, coriander is your seed. Mint, bay leaves, summer savory, mustard, fennel, lavender, capers, and fenugreek. Some fruits and vegetables related to the New Old World: parsnips, cherries, pears, turnips, asparagus, cauliflower, pine nuts, artichokes. Okay. Saffron, chervil, garlic. Aleppo pepper is actually native to Syria. Aleppo, Syria, that's where it gets its name. Basil, sumac, licorice, cardamom, turmeric, and black sesame seed. There we go. Let me go back. Oops, I've skipped one. There we go. All right, so parts of the Levant region and other parts of Asia: dates, figs, pomegranate, lemons, as we mentioned earlier, mangoes, almonds, onions, and eggplant. And then these items are all native to Africa, particularly North Africa. So you have tamarind, citron melon, okra, anise, grains of paradise, which has the flavors of black pepper. Cumin, winter savory. I mentioned coffee earlier. Cowpeas. We all know them better as black-eyed peas. The true yam at the bottom is a lot larger and a little bit different than what we're used to when people say yams here. Sometimes they're referring to a sweet potato. But you can go to places to actually get this yam. Probably the closest place is the E-Mark that's down Warwick Boulevard. You can actually go in there and find that. And then you have sesame seed. So it's white, it's dried, and it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different than what I'm used to, and I'm struggling trying to figure out how to describe how it tastes. There's some notes of a potato somewhat in there. Yes.
You had pine nuts on there as coming from the Old World. Are you telling me there were no pine trees in North America?
No, they did not. Not the kind that they're using at that time, no.
Okay, there were no pine trees, or there just were no pine trees where they had the pine nut?
The pine nut.
That was being used as food?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Sugar cane is also one that gets its start coming in from parts of Asia, coming through the Mediterranean, eventually out into the Atlantic. And if you see this bottom picture down here, you can actually see that it's coming from parts of Southeast Asia here, and then making its way across the globe. Tea is native to China. Wheat, native to parts of the Middle East. And there were some New World plants here. You have amaranth and you have quinoa. Both of them, through archaeological discoveries, they've put them back close to about 5800 BC, and that they were traded up and down parts of South America. They were eaten, ground into flour, made and fermented into beer. The outer coating for quinoa was actually used for soap and for parts of medicine. You've got a little bit of a different than the yam, but you have cassava that has gone through a couple of different names, also used as a flour, dried into cakes. Peanuts are native to South America, particularly Peru. They eventually do make their way across the Atlantic. They're used in African cooking today as well as others. They were introduced into Virginia in the 17th century and were considered as poor man's food until the 1900s. And there were songs as you move through the time periods of the 1900s, particularly the Civil War. If you've ever heard of goober peas, they are referring to peanuts. And then you have the potato, also native to South America. What's interesting is that there's a number of different names and there's 100 different varieties of potatoes, different shapes, sizes, and flavors. But I want to call your attention to this bottom one down here. This is called chuno. Those are freeze-dried potatoes. Indigenous populations figured out that if they went up into the higher elevations, smashed the potatoes by foot, leave them there to freeze, and then when things got warmer, they would thaw. Then when things got colder, they would freeze. And they would keep doing this until they dried up and looked like that. And that allowed them to carry that potato with them to a variety of places. They can peel it and then use it. I have not tasted that, so I can't tell you how that tasted. And then sweet potatoes are also going to be in that as well. Squash, also native to North and South America. You've got a variety of different types of squash that were found here. Of course, tobacco is native to this part of the world as well, starting in the Caribbean and eventually making its way into what would be North and South America. And tomatoes. Tomatoes are also native to the New World, particularly in Mexico. Europeans believed for a long time that tomatoes were poisonous. Tomatoes are in the same nightshade family as tobacco. And I do have a question for all of you with tomatoes in just a second. Cacao, or what would become chocolate, is also indigenous to the New World. There's an image there of the Aztecs actually making chocolate, but they're drinking it. It was considered as medicine, and it was going to be the extreme wealthy. The next few images that I show you were ingredients that were added to chocolate or to the cocoa beans. Chili peppers are going to be added. Been around for 6,000 years, so there are the scientific names for those, but let me real quickly tell you what that means. That first one, the Capsaicum annuum, are going to have cayenne peppers, bell peppers, and jalapenos in them. The second one includes Tabasco. The third one includes Scotch bonnet and habaneros. And then the very last one are a variety of different peppers that are not known outside Central and South America. So a variety of peppers, so that was included with your chocolate, so there's a spice to it. Corn is also going to be added to that popular drink. It gives it a little bit of its grittiness, and it's kind of ground up. And vanilla is also going to be added as well. Now, that means what two ingredients are missing? Sugar and milk. Both of those brought over by the Europeans. So when the Aztecs and the Mayans are making their chocolate, they're actually using water, and they would have foamed it up and then tossed it back. Now, there are companies that actually make what they call Aztec or Mayan chocolate. There is no sugar in it. You will have those other ingredients, It's very different. You just have to be used to the grit that's going to be at the bottom of your cup. And you can also go to places like Colonial Williamsburg and actually get your hands on that chocolate. Yes. So if you want a little bit of a kick with your hot chocolate, you can always add cinnamon if you would like. That also gives you that warming sensation. So some other fruits and vegetables that were native to the area: agave, allspice, alligator pear, you know it better as avocado, chia seed, peanuts, jojoba, blueberries, hog plum, which is a combination of flavors of various fruits, pineapples, sunflowers, blackberries, cashew nuts, Brazil nuts, cassava, cranberries, epazote, guava, husk tomato. Anybody want to take a guess? So tomatillo. You've got currants, you've got passion fruit, you've got pecans, persimmons, prickly pears, raspberries, soursop, papaya. The pawpaw is known as a tropical papaya. Tomarillo is a different from making our other tomato there. Walnuts, jicama, cactus, lucuma. I put sunflower up there twice. Jerusalem artichoke or sunchoke. Rubber is also native to North and South America, as well as quinine. Continuing on, beans are native to both worlds. There's different varieties. So you have, for the New World, topiary or tapiary beans, runner beans like your scarlet runners. You have your beans like lima beans. And then you also have your common beans, your kidney, your navy beans, pinto beans. Beans that were indigenous to the Old World: fava beans or broad beans, soybeans, peas, chickpeas, and lentils. Grapes are native to both worlds, found in both areas, used in different varieties. Rice is another one that is native to both worlds. There were softer Asian varieties that Europeans were used to. There were also wild rices that were found here as well, used by indigenous populations. Strawberries are also native to both worlds. Size is going to be a little bit different. And then, of course, you have the people. With the Great Exchange, there is an influx of people coming in, and there are interactions, strange and different interactions depending on where you are. So if you look at North and South America, you have a number of different indigenous people. You also have Africans who are coming into North and South America, many of them via the transatlantic slave trade or the triangle trade here. But that also means with the interactions and encounters between Europeans, indigenous populations, and Africans, you're also going to get a variety of different languages, depending on where you are. In parts of like the Great Antilles, the official languages, even today, are English, Spanish, French, Dutch, Haitian Creole, and then the Palomino is also a different type of Creole language, so there was a blending of words. Same thing in the Lesser Antilles with some of those same ones. I also wanted to see what were the top 10 languages spoken in the New World. So last year there was a survey done, and the top 10 languages spoken in parts of Central and South America: Spanish, Aymara, which is an indigenous language; Italian kind of shocked me; Quechuan, Guarani, which is another indigenous dialect; German, English, Hunsrück, Italian, and I had to make sure that I spelled that correctly, it's a Venetian dialect; and Portuguese. Those were the top 10 for South America. For the United States, the top 10 most spoken languages: Russian, Korean, Tagalog, Chinese, Arabic, English, Spanish, French, German, and Vietnamese. Those were the top 10. I also recently found this map, and it shows some of the top language spoken throughout all 50 states. Virginia is actually Korean for that language. Now, there are some effects of the global exchange, and again, wasn't able to cover everything. But you have a change in cartography going. You start seeing, sadly, Columbus does not get his name on that land he thought he landed on. Amerigo Vespucci's name is added to that. So you get North and South America, and eventually, as people continue exploring, you'll have the Arctic as well as Australia and Antarctica added to the maps. But if we break it down a little bit more, just in the simplest terms, biological impact, there's a spread of disease across both worlds. There's population growth and decrease, your environmental and agricultural impacts, there's introduction of non-native species, both animal as well as plant. There's new global ecosystems, deforestation, soil depletion. There's also changes in agricultural practices. For the economic impact, you have expanded trade routes, the rise of capitalism, there's extraction of gold and silver, there's vast maritime empires that are created, there's a transfer of technologies, innovation. Transatlantic slave trade is a consequence of exploration. I also have it listed twice because there is a cultural impact with the transatlantic slave trade as well. You have a clash and fusion of cultures. There's an emergence of new ethnicities and racial identities, spread of religion amongst the indigenous populations as well as the enslaved Africans that are coming in. There's a spread of European language, and one of my personal favorites, the globalization of food and cuisines. There's a blending of that, and this is one of my favorite pictures from our collection, but I'm gonna blow it up just for a second. Just take a look real quick. They are eating spaghetti, okay? But if you look closely at the plate of spaghetti, what's missing? The sauce is missing, or is it? It could be a white sauce, it could be butter. It's some kind of oil, 9 times out of 10, olive oil in that. So this also lets us know that the tomato really does not ingrain itself in the foodways immediately. It's something that had to spread itself in. The tomato actually makes its way into places like Italy around the 1550s and such. But when the food and fusion creates, there's all kinds of foods that when we eat them, we think that they're native to one place, and they're not. So for instance, I was surprised that fish and chips was not native to England. Its origins actually started in Spain and Portugal. Or the fact that donuts, we get to thank the ancient Greeks for that. We also get to thank them for cheesecake as well. So there's a fusion of every single part of human life with the transatlantic with the global exchange, both good, bad, and such.